Hi guys, it's Emily from Noble Novels and welcome to today's video. This is my history with the Brontes, and it just is going to be a little chatty video. I have not planned it whatsoever, so this is going to be quite a rambly style Emily video where I talk about my love for the Brontes and why I started loving the Brontes and my history with the Brontes, because obviously we're doing the Bronte readathon. I've got to talk about it. So let's go to years back. By the way, before I do anything else, you have to see this jumper Charlie gave me this years ago. I love it. And it's a Jane Eyre video, a Jane Eyre jumper, and it's got, "I am no bird, no net ensnares me." And talk about me, this could not be a more me book, more me quote, because I do not like being ensnared. I do not like being told what to do. I like to be a free bird. I like to go and do my own thing. I like to go with the flow, because 9 times out of 10, if I don't, things go tits up. That's me. So Charlie smashed it, even though Jane Eyre is my second favourite. But I am doing a book next week about my ranking of the Bronte novels, because I realised I've not done one. That one will be a shorter book, because a bit shorter video, because actually there is only 3 books that I've read by the Brontes that I've read more than once. Go into that a little bit today. But so yes, some of the other books, and I think some of the other books I need to revisit, but yeah. So if you hadn't guessed, my name is Emily Jane. So part of that name, I'm named Emily because my mum, at the time of my birth, Emma was a big name that was popular, and my mum did not want me to have the same name as Emma, but she liked Emily. And I think it is slightly connected to Brontes. My middle name, Jane, is after my dad's mum, my dad's sister. And I've also got aunties with the middle name Jane and cousin with the middle name Jane. So that is a family name, which we've carried on going because Mia is Amelia Jane. So my name, Emily Jane, is actually the full name of Emily Jane Bronte, which is a massive connection. I love that connection. It's not deliberate totally. Charlie, from Charlie Book Reads, I will link her channel down below because she's my sister and my best friend in the universe. She is Charlotte, originally. Don't tell it, if you ever call her Charlotte, you will get killed. Sorry, she would literally murder you. She is Charlotte. Originally, don't laugh, my mum thought she was going to be a boy and she was going to be Leslie Charles, because Leslie was both my granddad's names and Charles, I can't remember how that was connected. So when my mum found out she was going to be a girl, she had the name Charlotte. She changed it to Charlotte, so obviously that's Charlotte Bronte who wrote Jane Eyre, and that's also another connection. I think that was a kind of partial deliberate, partial not. And then my youngest sister, Vicky, is Victoria Anne. Again, if you call her Victoria, she will murder you. I'm the only one who likes my full name. And Anne is obviously the name of the youngest Bronte, and obviously Vicky is the youngest out of us girls. That is partly connected to the Brontes because obviously Mum was aware that she'd done the 2 Brontes anyway, and partly also connected to my great nan, who was called Anne Jenkins. Now, for those of you that have not been on my channel long, my family, my mum's side of the family, is very dominant in my reading, my love of reading. And family history for me is very, very important. Obviously, I love my dad's side of the family and I know some bits of them, but my mum is one of 8 children. And her mum, although I was born in the same town as my nan, and so was Charlie very briefly. We didn't live necessarily near them, but I had the closest bond with my mum's mum. Unfortunately, we lost her quite a while ago to pancreatic cancer, which killed me. I think that was, out of all 4 of my grandparents, she was the second that we lost, and she was the one that I was probably the most closest to. So you can imagine that was a very, very hard loss. Like God, it was, yeah, we lost her before we lost my dad. So those 2 losses were ridiculous. I'm not saying that I don't love my other grandparents, but my nan had a biggest influence on my life. She obviously, my mum was one of 8, my sisters, I'm one of 4 technically with my brother, and we fostered a lot. But even though I didn't live on the same town as my nan, we saw her quite regularly. She was the strongest woman I've ever met before my mum, if you don't count my mum. Her and my mum are literally the strongest women I've ever met in my life. And I'm not just saying that because she was my nana, but she was born in like a time, she was one of quite a lot of children, but she had a love of literature. and she did not take crap. She was a feisty Londoner. Well, that's when my mum was born. She was feisty, real Londoner. Didn't take rubbish. She was redhead, naturally a redhead, and then she dyed it, I think. But she was naturally a redhead, and she had that fiery redheadness. Her mum was one of the daughters of one of the suffragettes, so we had that suffragette era through us. So this is it. It does connect to Brontes, don't worry. But my nan was one for literature. She was one for books. Since she's died, I found out from my uncle, my mum's big brother, how many books we actually liked in common, which I didn't realise, because I didn't realise how long Philippa Gregory was around. But my nan was a big Philippa Gregory fan, but she was a big fan of the Brontes, and she was a big fan of the poems, and she would read us poetry when we were growing up, and she would read books, and she loved the Brontes, and she loved literature. And I swear to God, that is how I became a lover of books. Growing up, we went over there. We didn't have loads of money, but she would talk about books, and she would talk about literature, and she would talk about history, and she'd talk about strong women, and really, really encourage us to be strong. Because even back when I was born, I'm like 46, 46 now, technically, when this video goes live. It wasn't like women were empowered. We weren't taught how strong. We didn't. No such thing as women's pride, and I'm not saying that men should be down. No, but she taught us to be strong in ourselves. And you guys know I've had battles with my health, and like she was around when I had my car accident, and she was around, and she always. And like now we know I have dyspraxia, but back then it wasn't known, and I had coordination issues, and I'm a chatterbox, and I'm misunderstood, whatever. But she knew me better than anything, and she fought me to be strong, and she had that connection. Because the Brontes, if you look at their literature, they are so strong women. They were some of the women that had, like, the most passion and the most, like, I'm rereading Jane Eyre at the moment with, actually now it looks like I'm rereading it with Chatty from the Mad Chatter, Cat from Bruiser Reviews, and Danny from Danny's Book World. And we're reading that at the moment, and it really is about, like, Jane is such a strong character, even at the start of the book. Like, I'm rereading it, and you think that's quite modern. The way she's written is actually quite modern. And The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, again, if you look at the literature in that, the lead character is strong, and she's fighting against prejudice and things like that. And that's why the Brontes write strong characters, and that wasn't so much done. They were literally, if you think they were ahead of their time in the kind of literature they wrote. And that's why I always encourage people to read them, because they're so ahead of their time. And yes, they're Marmite books, but God, they're so strong. And that was what my nan sort of obviously brought in the Brontes, and the names connection and things like that. My mum likes the Bronte books as well. Charlie has read, I think she's read all of them. I think she's read most of them. Charlie likes Jane Eyre as well, I believe. I'm pretty sure. I should have checked all this before I filmed. And I know she's read Wuthering Heights, and I know she likes Anne Bronte's works. Hay fever season, sorry about this, not planned, I don't edit. So yeah, so that's how, like, my connection to the Brontes in that way. Now I have limited memories of my school time books. For me, English is actually a hard subject for me, because my handwriting is absolutely bloody awful. If you were to see it, it is awful. Now we know why, that's fair enough. But back then it wasn't always easy. And the thing with me is, if you hadn't guessed, the fact that I read loads of books, it's because how much I take in. I need to make myself read slower sometimes, because I zoom read. Like, things go into my brain quicker than I can process them. So I struggle to take stuff in. I can verbalise things really well. Kind of, sometimes. When I'm tired, I'm not so much. But you know what I mean. But to try and write it down, I've always found it really hard, because I get the words jumbled up. I'm not dyslexic, but I do get the words sometimes jumbled up, and I found English hard. But it was really weird. I found English hard, but I love reading, and I've loved reading since all my life. All my life I've loved it. Like, I grew up with Sweet Valley High books. I grew up with so many of going to the library. That was our thing. We didn't necessarily go and spend loads on the things. We went to the library and read. So that's always been my love of reading. But when I was at school, one of the books that I remember reading, the first book that is in my head of reading at school was Wuthering Heights. And for some reason, it's one of the only ones I remember reading at school that I loved to passion. I did read Midsummer Night's Dream, which I did enjoy at school. I vaguely remember that. I did read, I think, Hamlet. And I read West Side Story, I think. What was another one? Plays. I remember some of the plays. But Wuthering Heights was the book that I read at school, and I remember. Now, going down the generations, Mia has read it through school. She's also read Jane Eyre. Mia likes Jane Eyre more, which makes me so proud. Like, I kind of want to see if I can get her to watch Jane Eyre on TV. Actually, you've just reminded me. I'm just reminded I can watch today that I'm filming this. I can start watching Wuthering Heights films on YouTube. I'm going to go and look at my TV and see if I can find that, because that's quite exciting, isn't it? So I'm going to do that. But yeah, so Mia's now read 2 of the books. I wonder what Thomas will think. I don't necessarily think it will be a Thomas kind of thing, but it has been really interesting again talking to Mia and finding out which one she preferred. And she really liked Jane Eyre. She thought that was a really like strong woman, and I love the fact she's reading it. So yeah, I failed English the first time around. Had I not, and when I reset it, I got like an A when I reset it. But I didn't have a very good teacher in English back then, and unfortunately I failed. So I wanted to do English in sixth form and do A-levels, but I didn't get the chance. I still had this dream, but now there's no bloody point. I think I've hit that point in my life where I'm like 46 and I'm like, oh, I couldn't do that, and there's no point now. But I'm gonna literally keep my passion for literature, because I have that passion, and you guys know it. So Wuthering Heights I read at school. One of the first books I read when I joined BookTube was Jane Eyre. The first time I read it was with Charlie from Charlie Books Reads, and we read it with some other booktubers at the time, and I really fell in love with it. It was my first Charlotte Bronte book, and I liked it. I think I only rated it 4 stars the first time, but I enjoyed it. Then I think I read it, and then I started reading a bit more of the Brontes. I can't remember exactly in which order from joining BookTube, but I remember then hearing, because obviously one of the first booktubers I was subscribed to was Katie from Books and Things, and I was subscribed to her before I actually joined YouTube. Yes, I'll be linking Katie's channel down below, and she had such a passion for the Brontes, so I'm pretty sure I then started reading some of the other Bronte books. I'm pretty darn sure it was 10 above. No, it wasn't. I think I might have read another one of Charlotte Bronte's books, but I remember reading Wuthering. Yes, that was the next one. I read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, and I read that 4 years ago, because that's one of the 2 books that I reread, and I really loved that. Again, it was only like 4 stars, but I really enjoyed it, and I found a love for Anne Bronte, and oh, that's good. Then I read some of the Bronte's poetry, which I've read about quite a few times, and I've read some of their poems, and I've loved them. Actually, I want to reread some more of their poems. And then I've started reading through all of Charlotte Bronte's books. I read Villette, I read The Professor, I'm reading my brain. Villette and The Professor. Shirley was the last one I read. And then I read Agnes Grey as well. And I started reading all their books. I think in amongst this, I've read Wuthering Heights Wuthering Heights I read at the early days of my reread. So I probably reread Wuthering Heights once at least after Jane Eyre. So that was twice I read that. Then I read a third time I did a Wuthering Heights read along with Kate Howe, and I did a Jane Eyre read along. So I read that a second time, at least a second time. I swear to God, I must have read that in between BookTube as well, Wuthering Heights. Then I read this with a read along that I did during Victober one year. Fell in love with this, and I watched the film of it. Got the film still, loved that. Then the following year I did a reread of The Wuthering Heights, and I've since read it again. I think I read it last October as well, so I've read this 4 times at least. I've read this, and I'm now on my 3rd time rereading this, Jane Eyre. I reread Tenant of Wildfell Hall last year, and I love the Brontes. Literally, I think the connection, like, I read about them. I also read a non-fiction book about the Brontes from Elizabeth Gaskell. Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a book about Charlotte Bronte. So, I forgot about this. I could talk about them a bit more. So I know that I read, actually, the first non-fiction book I actually read about the Brontes was The Brontes by Juliet Barker, which is a Mahusian book. I read that with another booktuber a long time ago, but that was a literary book, and that gave the history of the whole Brontes. So it talks about the fact that they had the Bronte girls, it wasn't just those 3, Emily, Charlotte and Anne. They had 2 older sisters who died when they were young. They obviously had Branwell, their brother. And it talks about the whole history. It talked about literally every single bit of their history, from their parents, the fact their dad moved over. I think their parents both moved over from Ireland, but I know the fact their dad did. And I read about that, and I loved reading about that. I know that Charlotte Bronte was friends with Elizabeth Gaskell. So Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a non-fiction book about Charlotte, but it was a bit edited because obviously she was friends. So she was very biased on Charlotte, and she very much wrote it posthumously, and it was really, really good book. But obviously I'm now going to be reading the Emily Bronte book, and apparently before this goes live, I had the challenge to read it in a day, the Emily Bronte non-fiction book. So I've loved reading non-fiction books about the Brontes, about the history, the Victorian history. It's set, their works are so dark. Like, they're all set up in Yorkshire because that was where they were born, that was where they lived, and a lot of their days were at Yorkshire. Jane Eyre is actually loosely connected. A lot of Charlotte's works are loosely connected to her history. Like, there's bits in the start of Jane Eyre where she's living at Lowood, which is a boarding school. And that is actually connected to a school that she lived at, that she went to with her sisters. And there's stuff that happens in that book. I can't go into too much detail because it's a spoiler for Jane Eyre. But there is stuff that happened at Lowood in Jane Eyre that actually did realistically happen to Charlotte Bronte's family. That was where two of their older two sisters died at the school, the boarding school they went to. And that was the things at the time. So that was quite interesting that I've known that connection. There is also, I think there's connections with Villette, or the professor, with when Charlotte went abroad to study. So there's connections there, and I love that connection. Villette and the professor are very connected to Brontes, and they're very, very similar books, although I slightly prefer the professor actually to Villette, which is really weird, although the professor is a bit icky if you think about certain things that are written in that book. But yeah, so Charlotte's Bronte's book. Charlotte obviously wrote the most Bronte books. She wrote Jane Eyre. I know them off the top of my head, but I still always remember she's literally written it. Jane Eyre, Villette, Professor, and she's written loads. So she wrote those, but she also wrote the poetry. I've also got the short story collections. Why on earth my brain is not? She also has the short story collections. I'm not going to look. My brain is not in good today. So she also had the short story collection with Bramwell, which I'm going to be reading the second half of the month, because Bramwell actually did do some writing before he turned a bit into the alcohol side. So she wrote some books for them, but she wrote the most books because she lived the longest. Emily only wrote Wuthering Heights. But she also had her poetry. Emily died first, and that is so sad. It's still ridiculously sad what happened to them. They all died of consumption. It was TB basically in their time. But Emily died first, then Anne. Anne obviously wrote The Scent of Wild Hall and Agnes Grey. I love Agnes Grey. I think I'm going to be rereading that this year at some point. I also want to reread Shirley. So many books I want to reread. They're all the Brontes. You can't tell how much I love them. But yeah, and Anne was the second daughter to die. And I think Bramwell died after Emily, but I'm not entirely sure if Bramwell died before or after Emily, but before Anne. And Anne is actually buried somewhere different to the other Brontes because Charlotte took her away because she thought taking her somewhere else to die would keep her alive. Taking her somewhere else would keep her alive longer, and that's quite heartbreaking what happened to them. And Charlotte died not because of consumption, but because she died when she was given birth. And she died, and it was very sad. The baby didn't survive, and bad pregnancy, things like that. And that was her history. But her dad was the one that brought these books out. A lot of their books were published posthumously, but after they've died. It's just amazing. Like, yes, their books are dark. Their books are set in Yorkshire. Their books, not all of Charlotte's are actually. They're all sort of set up, and because Charlotte obviously did travel. Charlotte was the one that travelled the most. I think Emily went with her to study abroad. I don't think it was Emily or Amber. I think it was Emily. But yeah, I don't know why you lot all think that I read a lot of happy books. I read a lot of contemporaries, light books. But for me, my favourite dark ever book is Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is my favourite book I've ever read in my life. It is the one that I reread the most. It is the most darkest book going. But somehow, every time I reread it, I get more out of it. Every time I reread it, I get lost. I know the characters. I know them in my head. I could live and breathe the Brontes. And yeah, Wuthering Heights is my favourite book ever. Jane Eyre's second. So that's already telling you that Bronte one. That's going to be flipping not helpful. But I don't plan these stuff, do I? but I love the Bronte works. Yes, they're dark. Anne's books are less dark, I believe. And apart from Jane Eyre's probably the darkest one, but the one, my favourite, yeah. But this is my history of the Brontes. This is why I have feel so many connections with them, and why I did this readathon on my birthday month. March was the month of the year that Charlotte died, and she was the most published author, and that connection with the fact of my birthday, because obviously it's my favourite book of all time, made me want to reread the Brontes, and made me want to share my love of the Brontes with all of you. At the end of the month, obviously on the 28th, I'm now pretty much sure, I don't know exactly what time we're doing the live. I'm doing a live with Katie to talk about why she loves the Brontes and what about the Brontes with her, and how that was our connection, that was one of the many connections that drew me to Katie's channel and drew me to BookTube. So thank you, Katie, for sharing that love. Thank you all for supporting me with the Brontes and supporting my love. I think Wuthering Heights. If you got to the end of this video, let me know if you like the Brontes. Let me know what it is about the Brontes. If there's any other books you want to read, just talk to me in the comments about the Brontes. I love it. If you got to the end of this video, leave me a house emoji, because they're all set in the old houses and the old, like, a big house. One of the big house emojis if you got to the end of this video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, not subscribed, ring on my ding-a-ling. I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.